Welcome to the debate. I want to invite you to step into a thought experiment with me. Imagine you're, sitting around a fire on the African savanna. It's roughly 100,000 years ago.
Okay, painting a picture.
Right. So you're cold, your stomach is empty, and out in the darkness, just beyond the flicker of the flames, you see the silhouette of a massive predator. You desperately want to warn the person sitting across from you. You have a brain, you have vocal cords, you feel the urgency.
But nothing happens.
Exactly. You open your mouth to formulate a warning, but absolutely nothing comes out. No words, no abstract concepts, just, biological silence.
And that silence is, it's deafening when you consider what we eventually became, right? We're looking at a species that went from that sheer inability to articulate a single thought to eventually splitting the atom.
Yeah.
To writing the Iliad and, organizing global political structures. It's wild.
Which makes this one of the most profound scientific mysteries in existence. How did we transition from mute hominids into a species defined by shared narratives? The crux of this mystery really lies in the timeline and the mechanism of that transition.
Because we're dealing with an artifact language that is made entirely of air.
Right, it doesn't fossilize. So we have to reverse engineer this entire phenomenon from scattered skulls, fragments of DNA, and cave walls. Now, I represent the discontinuity hypothesis. I argue that true language, which is characterized by abstract symbols and recursive syntax, was a sudden, distinct cognitive leap.
A sharp mutation, essentially.
Yes, a sharp mutation that irrevocably separated human consciousness from the rest of the animal kingdom.
Well, while I take the opposing view, representing the continuity hypothesis, I argue that language is not some isolated biological miracle. It is the endpoint of a very long, highly gradual evolutionary road.
Built on what, exactly?
Built incrementally upon existing primate anatomy, genetics, and manual gestures. I mean, the groundwork was laid over millions of years.
Look, I struggle to see how an evolutionary timeline that drawn out actually accounts for what language truly is. If we define our terms here, the discontinuity hypothesis hinges on the massive, unbridgeable chasm between an animal's direct signal and a human's abstract symbol.
Right, the difference between a signal and a word.
Exactly. When a dog growls, that is a direct biological signal. The growl itself is the threat. It's physically tied to the emotion. But human language is, it's entirely divorced from physical reality.
Because the word danger doesn't sound dangerous.
It doesn't sound dangerous. It doesn't look dangerous. We have simply forged this collective agreement that a specific, arbitrary vibration of air molecules represents an abstract concept. I mean, every word we use is essentially a social hallucination.
A social hallucination. I mean, that is a beautiful way to phrase it. But a shared abstraction doesn't preclude a gradual physical development of those agreed upon meanings.
You think that biology prepared us for the hallucination?
Absolutely. If you analyze the biological record, you see that our anatomy was steadily preparing for that exact hallucination over an immense period. Take the human larynx, for instance.
Okay.
In most mammals, chimpanzees included, the larynx sits very high in the throat. And that's highly practical. It allows them to breathe and swallow simultaneously.
Which sounds like a great design.
It is. But in humans, the larynx has dropped. It sits much lower, which creates a larger resonating chamber above the vocal cords, the pharynx. And that larger chamber is what allows us to produce the incredible nuanced range of vowels and consonants required for speech.
Right, a physical adaptation that came with a notoriously lethal design flaw.
It did, yeah. Because our larynx dropped to create that speech chamber, the pathways for food and air cross. We are literally the only mammals that routinely choke to death on our own food.
It's a huge evolutionary risk.
Exactly. Now think about the evolutionary pressure required to force that change. Natural selection decided that the ability to make complex vocalizations was so advantageous, it was worth the persistent daily risk of dying from a piece of lodged meat.
That is a stark way to look at it.
But it's true. You do not see that kind of high-stakes biological trade-off occur in a sudden evolutionary leap. It requires a relentless, incremental accumulation of pressure over hundreds of thousands of years.
I mean, I agree the anatomy changed, but having the physical apparatus to make a sound is drastically different from possessing the cognitive architecture to process complex grammar.
You're separating the hardware from the software.
Yes, because the machinery required to process recursive syntax, the ability to embed ideas inside other ideas, like the man who I think knows the woman who lost the dog.
Right, nested concepts.
That ability is binary. You either have the neural circuitry to sequence thoughts that way or you don't. Somewhere between 100,000 and 50,000 years ago, something clicked in the human brain.
A sudden software update.
Without that specific cognitive click, human communication remains trapped in simple vocal signaling. It didn't grow slowly, it erupted.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Go ahead.
The concept of an overnight eruption completely ignores the hard fossil and genetic evidence we've actually pulled from the dirt. You are separating the physical capacity from the cognitive art, but they are deeply intertwined.
Intertwined, maybe, but not the same thing.
But that physical capacity is staggeringly ancient. Let's look at the fossils. In 1989, scientists excavating Kebra Cave in Israel found a 60,000-year-old Neanderthal skeleton. And incredibly, the hyoid bone was perfectly preserved.
Ah, right. The U-shaped bone in the neck.
Yes, exactly. It's the only free-floating bone in the human body. It doesn't connect to any other bone. It's suspended purely by the muscles and tendons of the jaw, the tongue, and the larynx.
So it controls tongue movement.
Right, because it anchors the tongue. Its exact shape dictates what an organism can do with its mouth. That Neanderthal hyoid was functionally indistinguishable from yours or mine. It proves that 60,000 years ago, Neanderthals had the mechanical ability to articulate complex phonemes.
That's just the anatomy, though.
But we can push the timeline back way further than that using genetics. In the early 2000s, researchers identified the FOXP2 gene.
Oh, right, which the media unfortunately dubbed the language gene, to the immense frustration of every geneticist on the planet.
Oh, they disguised that nickname. But, the correlation is undeniable. Humans with a defective FOP2 gene suffer from profound expressive language disorders. They can't sequence the fine motor movements of their lips and tongue, and they really struggle with basic grammar.
So it's tied to speech mechanics.
Yes, and here is the critical piece of data. Human beings have a specific variant of FOP2 containing 2 unique mutations not found in chimpanzees or any other primate. Natural selection favored these mutations heavily.
Okay, but how does that tie back to Neanderthals?
Well, when geneticists finally managed to sequence Neanderthals' DNA, they discovered that Neanderthals possessed the exact same 2 mutations.
Meaning those mutations had to be present in the last common ancestor we shared with Neanderthals.
Exactly, which pushes the date of origin back to roughly 400,000 years ago, 400 millennia.
Wow, that is old.
The genetic coordination for speech and the physical architecture of the throat were established almost 500,000 years ago. You cannot look at a 400,000-year-old biological adaptation for speech and argue that language spontaneously erupted 50,000 years ago.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Finding a mutated FOXP2 gene in a Neanderthal does not mean that Neanderthal was speaking in complex sentences.
It means they had the capacity for it.
But language is a massively polygenic trait. It involves thousands of genes interacting across entirely different brain regions. FOXP2 is primarily a transcription factor that helps build motor control pathways.
Right, motor control of the mouth.
Sure, having fine motor control of the mouth might have been used for complex breath control during running, or, I don't know, for imitating animal calls during a hunt. It absolutely does not equal the abstract symbolic reasoning required for language.
But if the anatomy and the genetics are shifting so specifically toward oral motor control, it strongly implies a gradual sloping toward speech. Why else develop it?
Because if they were speaking 400,000 years ago, where is the cultural footprint? This is the gaping hole in the gradualist argument.
The lack of artifacts?
Yes, language isn't just noise.
It is a tool that allows a species to alter its environment, to share knowledge across generations, to innovate. Yet if we examine the archaeological record of Homo erectus or Neanderthals, their material culture is staggeringly static.
I wouldn't say static.
The Acheulean hand axe remained virtually unchanged for over 1,000,000 years. Neanderthal Mousterian tools show very little innovation over hundreds of millennia.
But tool making isn't the only marker of intelligence.
If they possessed recursive syntax, if they were sitting around sharing myths and debating tool-making techniques, their material culture would reflect that shared knowledge. But it is entirely stagnant.
The fact that they weren't building spaceships doesn't mean they weren't communicating. I mean, wooden spears, animal hides, and social structures don't survive in the geological record.
But we know exactly what it looks like when true language does arrive, because the archaeological record suddenly lights up like a fireworks display.
You're talking about the Upper Paleolithic.
Yes, the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, starting around 70,000 years ago. Suddenly, out of nowhere, humans begin creating representational art. We find the Chauvet cave paintings in France, 36,000 years old, depicting rhinos and lions with sophisticated depth and perspective.
They are incredible.
We find Venus figurines carved from mammoth tusk. We find flutes fashioned from the hollow bones of vultures. We see the emergence of long-distance trade networks for seashells and obsidian.
All complex behaviors.
That sudden behavioral explosion is the undeniable fingerprint of language. Humans learn to take a concept that existed purely in the mind and externalize it into the physical world. That is what symbolic thought does.
But does it prove a sudden cognitive leap?
It doesn't take 400,000 years to figure out how to carve a bone flute if you already have the language to describe it to someone else.
I come at it from a different way. You are treating the cognitive ability to sequence ideas as if it requires a miraculous, isolated lightning strike in the brain. But there is a very clear, documented bridge between physical anatomy and abstract grammar.
And where's this bridge?
It sits right in our motor cortex. The transition wasn't sudden. It evolved smoothly out of our hands through what we call the gesture hypothesis.
Suggesting that what, sign language preceded vocal language?
Not just preceded it, but neurologically built the foundation for it. Consider Broca's area, the region in the left hemisphere of the human brain primarily responsible for speech production and grammar.
Sure, the language center.
Right. Well, in non-human primates, that exact same neural real estate is used to process.
So gesturing is processed in the same place as grammar.
Exactly. How does a brain learn to put words in a specific syntactic sequence? It co-opts the machinery it already uses to put physical actions into a physical sequence.
So you're saying the brain's ability to plan the sequential steps of like cracking a nut is repurposed to sequence a subject, a verb, and an object.
Precisely that. Pointing is the foundational linguistic act. It is a physical gesture that means direct your attention to that specific object. Human infants intuitively learn to point to share information long before their vocal cords can form words.
That's true. Babies point constantly.
But chimpanzees in the wild do not point to share information. They only reach for things they want. Early hominids likely developed incredibly complex systems of manual gesturing to coordinate hunts and teach toolmaking.
And vocalizations just got added on?
Over time, vocalizations, perhaps initially just rhythmic grunts used to keep time during cooperative physical labor, began to piggyback onto those hand gestures. The voice simply caught up to the hands, slowly replacing physical movement with vocal movement.
That is a highly compelling narrative of how motor sequencing could relate to syntactic sequencing, but I am not convinced by that line of reasoning.
Why not? The neurology lines up perfectly.
Because it drastically underestimates the rigid, mathematical structure of human grammar. If language were merely an advanced vocalized form of hand gesturing, it would be a loose, culturally invented system, but it isn't.
You think it's deeper than culture?
It possesses a universally hardwired cognitive architecture, which Noam Chomsky defined as universal grammar.
Right. You're asserting that grammar is an instinct rather than an invention.
I am asserting that the underlying rules of language are biologically embedded in our species. There are roughly 7,000 languages spoken today,
And despite their immense surface differences, from the tonal structures of Mandarin to the click consonants of the Kalahari San, every single one operates on the same deep structural principles.
The structural principles are shared, yes.
We see this most clearly in how children acquire language. We call it the poverty of the stimulus.
Meaning children are not exposed to enough complex grammar to learn it purely through trial and error.
Exactly. A toddler will routinely generate a sentence like, "I holded the rabbit." No adult has ever said the word holded to that child. The child is not mimicking or imitating a gesture they observed.
They're applying a rule.
Yes, they are independently applying an implicit, algorithmic rule about English past tense construction to a novel situation. Babies universally move through the exact same developmental milestones, babbling, single words, two-word combinations, on the exact same timeline.
Regardless of culture.
Regardless of their culture or how much explicit instruction they receive. A biological mechanism this rigid, this uniform across the entire species, implies a distinct, specialized evolutionary event. It is a unique operating system that was installed, not a slow modification of rhythmic grunting.
Well, that's a compelling argument regarding this structure. But we cannot ignore the environmental catalyst that forced that structure into existence. You can have a mutated FOXP2 gene, a drop larynx, and a primed Broca's area. But none of it becomes language without an intense, compounding evolutionary pressure.
And what was that pressure?
That pressure was purely social, and by definition, gradual. It really comes down to the mathematics of the social brain, primarily studied through evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar.
Dunbar's number. The connection between neocortex size and social group scaling.
Yes, Dunbar observed that the size of a primate's neocortex directly correlates with the maximum number of social relationships it can successfully manage. For humans, that cognitive limit is roughly 150 people.
Which is about the size of early hunter-gatherer bands.
Exactly. Now think about the cognitive load of a social group that size. It is not just about you knowing 150 individuals. It is about understanding the web of third-party relationships. You need to know that person A is currently allied with person B, but person B holds a grudge against person C.
Right. The combinatorial explosion of tracking all those social vectors.
It is a massive computational problem. Now, how do chimpanzees manage their social bonds and alliances? Through physical grooming. They sit together and pick insects out of each other's fur. It releases endorphins, builds trust, and solidifies rank.
But that's incredibly time-consuming.
Precisely. Physical grooming requires a one-to-one time commitment. As our ancestral groups expanded toward that 150 mark to protect against predators and share resources, physical grooming mathematically failed. You simply run out of daylight. You cannot physically groom everyone you need to stay allied with.
So vocal communication becomes a more efficient mechanism for social bonding.
Dunbar termed it social grooming by another means, or more bluntly, gossip. Gossip is the evolutionary killer app that drove language. You can vocal groom 3 or 4 people simultaneously while your hands are busy foraging.
That makes a lot of sense for basic social cohesion.
And as societies grew larger, the evolutionary pressure to track these incredibly complex, shifting alliances forced our communication to become incrementally more precise. You need precise syntax to explain exactly who did what to whom yesterday and who they might do it to tomorrow.
A feedback loop, essentially.
It's a relentless feedback loop. Better communication allows for a larger, safer society. A larger society demands even better communication. That is a slow, relentless scaling up, entirely driven by social mathematics.
I agree completely that the expansion of the social matrix was a critical factor. However, I argue that the act of gossiping relies on a cognitive threshold that cannot be crossed incrementally.
Why not?
The kind of data transfer you're talking about relies fundamentally on theory of mind.
It's the cognitive ability to recognize that other individuals have mental states, beliefs, and knowledge that differ from your own.
Which is the true bedrock of language. True language isn't just making a sound to trigger a reaction, it requires intentionality. When I speak a sentence to you, I am making a noise with the specific intention that you will recognize my intention to communicate a thought into your mind.
It's an exchange of mental models.
It is a form of social telepathy. I am modeling your internal mental state and recognizing what information you currently lack so that I can provide it to you.
Surely there are precursors to that in primate behavior. Chimpanzees show elements of deception, which requires some understanding of what another chimp can or cannot see.
They show elements of visual perspective taking, yes. But when a chimpanzee communicates, the function is almost exclusively imperative. They are requesting a behavior, demanding food, or responding to an immediate physical threat.
They don't just chat.
No, they do not communicate declaratively. A chimp never points to a tree just to share the abstract realization that the tree looks beautiful in the sunlight. They do not share information for the collaborative sake of sharing information.
That is a uniquely human trait.
The ability to model another mind and trust that the other mind is trying to understand your abstract intention is radically distinct to humans. You either possess the cognitive machinery to participate in that collaborative reality, or you don't. Once that binary threshold was crossed, it permitted the social telepathy of true language, creating a profound evolutionary discontinuity.
Well, I think labeling it a binary threshold obscures the millions of small neurological adaptations required to reach that point. We are looking at a process, not a switch.
Right. Well, when we step back and evaluate the entirety of this timeline, my position is that while biological shifts certainly prepared the ground, the actual onset of symbolic meaning and recursive syntax was a localized, dramatic cognitive revolution.
A revolution that rewrote the rules.
It fundamentally rewrote the rules of survival. By externalizing thought, humanity gained the ability to coordinate massive labor, to plan for futures that hadn't happened yet, and to construct the shared mythologies that bind entire civilizations together. It was not merely an upgrade in primate signaling, it was the birth of a completely new mode of existence.
And I maintain that the appearance of a revolution is an illusion, an artifact of the fact that cognition and soft tissue do not leave fossils.
Because the evidence is missing?
Because the capacity for language relies entirely on an unbroken chain of gradual, necessary adaptations, from the genetic mutation of FOX2PU, establishing motor pathways 400,000 years ago, to the slow descent of the larynx, risking our very lives for resonance.
All building up to speech.
Exactly, to the expansion of the social matrix that necessitated vocal grooming to survive. Language is a masterpiece painted over millions of years of evolutionary trial and error, not a sudden isolated miracle of the brain.
I think we have clearly mapped the boundaries of our disagreement today. We remain fundamentally divided on whether the emergence of language is best understood as a slow, gradual slope or a sudden, sharp cliff. We do.
Though I think the evidence forces us both to converge on one undeniable reality. The necessary crucible for speech was the exact intersection of anatomical readiness and compounding social complexity. Neither the biology nor the environmental pressure could have achieved this in isolation.
That is deeply true. The source material we've explored today contains fascinating implications regarding how, once this linguistic threshold was finally crossed, our cultural evolution accelerated so rapidly that it entirely outpaced our biological evolution.
It's a huge topic to unpack.
It is, but we will leave it to the listener to weigh the evidence and decide which hypothesis better explains the origins of our voice. It remains a profound exercise to reflect on the nature of that single ancient moment in Africa when two minds first reached across the dark to share an abstraction, to look across a fire at another human being, open your mouth, and finally break the silence.